get us going. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Absolutely glad to see you here. This is a legislative update with Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. And I'm Joan Van Biesler, and I'm the director of UU Justice Ohio. And Tad, if you want to introduce yourself, since you're delivering half this wonderful presentation.
I am Tad. I'm also with UUJO. I'm the secretary of UUCC up in Cleveland. Although I have a soft spot in my heart for West Shore because I was raised in Berea, and that was the first UU church I went to. So, hi everybody.
Oh, and tell them
Oh,
what UUCC stands for.
Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland, and I'm a lawyer, which qualifies me to give parts of these presentations because I'm not able to give as much advocacy as Joan is on the actual stage of the legislative process. So I can look at the bills.
Well, to start us off tonight, I'm going to do a little centering reading that actually came from an opinion piece 2 days ago by W. Kamau Bell, who is a comedian and a CNN commentator. And he said, as Frederick Douglass famously said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And he says, but until power accepts demands worded something like, oh, please give us justice, or if you wouldn't mind not oppressing us, we'd sure appreciate it. Well, then protesting in ways that may be loud, inconvenient, messy, damaging, and often beautiful is how Americans who believe in justice and joy will get those in power to act right. We could avoid all this, of course, if we just lived up to our ideals. But until then, I'll see you in those streets. And so we start tonight with those words. Until people start acting up to our ideals, then we have to use protest, we have to use petitions, letters, testifying at the State House, and any other means that we can to have our voices heard. So thank you for being here. If there's questions, if there's a particular bill or issue that you want to hear about, please put it in the chat. I'm going to start with a couple that folk have already asked for and said, we really want to hear what's happening with this. So I'm going to start with those. And then Tad's going to talk about some education bills. And then I'm going to talk about a few others that are around. Anti-protest bills. Our absolutely lovely House Bill 22 that says thou shalt not distract an officer. House Bill 109, which has all of the smorgasbord of anti-protest actions in there, you know, felonies and thou shalt not block streets and, you know, thou shalt not do anything that causes annoyance or else you've got a felony on your hands. And then Senate Bill 41, which says that even if you have nothing to do with vandalism, if you're in a protest of some kind and somebody does some kind of vandalism, even temporary, well, then you might get charged for it too, and charged for the cost of policing the event. And then Senate Bill 16, which first I'll start with Senate Bill 16. It was a mirrored version of House Bill 109, the one that is the long list of thou shalt nots in terms of protest. And Senate Bill 16 actually went through the Senate Judiciary Committee. And while it was in there, it was stripped of all of its protest language. So what remained was some protections for first responders and EMTs, and a misdemeanor if you block an ambulance or fire truck, even though a police person's telling you to get out of the way. That is not something, I mean, that's annoying, but once again, that's not nearly what it was. They stripped all of the protest language out of it. They left that to the House Bill 109. And so Senate Bill 16 has already passed through the committee and will be going before the Senate undoubtedly at its next session. So That one is kind of a, fortunately, we don't have to worry about that one at this point. Senate Bill 41 on restitution has not even had opposition, has not had any opposition hearings scheduled for it yet. We expect that will come after they're through with the budget work. If we have any luck whatsoever, it will be late summer, early fall. Reason being is that the head of the Senate, Matt Huffman, has said that he would prefer if the House dealt with all of the anti-protest bills, and they'll see what happens there. Then the Senate will take it up. Okay. House Bill 22, which is do not distract police officers and do not yell at them while they're making arrests, even if they're kneeling on the necks of somebody and choking them to death, because that could be a distraction. And then you too could be charged with a felony. Well, that bill, we surprised the people in the House committee that was looking at that one. We surprised them because we brought in a ton of folk to testify against it back in April. And if you look on the Ohio legislature page, you will see all of these, list after list of testimonies that were submitted. And a number of us were able to come and testify in person, even though they changed the date on that one too. But frankly, we scared the committee. They were not expecting any opposition to it.
I put the links in the
Oh,
chat
good.
for folks to look at the bills. You can also use those to navigate to get to the opposition testimony page, where you can hopefully read and see what folk had to say regarding these. So
Yeah.
I know Joan does good work, and we do good work in terms of the folk who are able to help that.
Yep.
And so if you want to take a look at that, hopefully you can use those links to navigate your way there.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Tad. Thank you so much. So anyway, we scared the living daylights out of him with House Bill 22. It had its opposition hearing. There was quite a strong opposition, and we know from our friends on the committee that they were really thrown back by it, and that's why they haven't proceeded any further with that one. They have not voted on it, and they have not proceeded with um, opposition testimony on House Bill 109, the one that is the big anti-protest bill. So they are reassessing their strategy, is what we're hearing. So we're expecting the House bills, the two anti-protest House bills, to show up later this summer, given the reports that we have from them. Any questions on that? Okay. And look on the UUJO Facebook page. I put on all of the different articles from the Capitol Journal and things like that about these different bills. So you can see that. Let's see. I also want to mention House Bill 294, which is the we're calling it the voter suppression bill because that's what it is. It's called the Ohio Election Security and Modernization Act. Okay. And that one has been proposed, but it has not had time for, it has not had a schedule for proponent or opponent testimony yet. And we are waiting for that one, and we're urging folk to develop their opponent testimony now, because this House bill limits access to drop boxes. A lot of counties, a lot of boards of election wanted to have more. This would limit it to only one, and it would limit it to 10 days before the election instead of the full early voting period. So I don't know about you, but I use the drop boxes, but it would limit it to 10 days beforehand. It also creates a more confusing voter ID requirement for voting by mail, by absentee ballot. It does cancel the early vote on the Monday before Election Day, but on the other hand, the boards of election didn't like that one anyway. And it shortens the absentee ballot request period by 10 days. And later on, if we've got a little time, I'll show you the sponsor testimony about that, because it was just, there was no reason for it. And he admitted that there was no reason for it. He said, well, we let the postmark, we have an acceptance of ballots that arrive 10 days after the election if they're postmarked properly. And he said, well, for the sake of symmetry, then we're going to limit the ability to get an absentee ballot 10 days before the election. There was no other reason given other than symmetry. Okay. So anyway, those are the things that are in this elections modernization. Now, I have to admit there are a couple of things in there that we really do like, such as the ability to get an absentee ballot online rather than having to do it with a paper copy mailed in or taken to a Dropbox, which won't exist anymore. But you can do that online if you have the right IDs, because those are getting more complex. You have to have a state ID or a driver's license. The other issue that they did clean up just a little bit, automated voter registration at the BMV when you go to get your license. You can actually update your voter registration, your address, or even register to vote when you go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. So that's a good thing. We like that. Keep that, but give us more drop boxes. Make it easier. Don't make it harder to vote by mail or absentee ballot. And don't be messing with, give us more drop boxes and don't be shortening the times. So anyway, that's one what we're definitely watching, and we will be out there for opponent testimony when that time comes. Any questions on that? Okay. Tad, do we want to go with some of yours? Okay.
Sure. I'm going to start off with two bills that were introduced 2 days ago. The ones about education that Joan had mentioned. Essentially, these bills would outlaw the teaching of critical race theory in public schools. Let's see here. There we go.
Can everybody see that?
All right, and I didn't accidentally mute myself, so I'm on a roll today. All right. So here are some of the bills that we talked about a little bit already. Of course, I'm going to mention some bail reforms things, and Joan already mentioned she's going to mention some things about brine. There is a bill that's recently got sponsored in the House as well that would ban certain sorts of extractions of natural gas and such from Lake Erie, or under Lake Erie rather, but I'll get to that when we get to that. Let's focus first on these school bills. So I want to start off with the names of these bills, and these are taken straight from the legislative website. So this is not me editorializing these. This is really what they're called. So House Bill 322 is entitled Regarding the Teaching of Certain Current Events and Certain Concepts Regarding Race and Sex in Public Schools. Similarly, House Bill 327 is Prohibit School Districts, community schools, STEM schools, and state agencies from teaching, advocating, or promoting divisive concepts, which just sounds the most 1984 thing I can imagine. All right. So because there's no analyses of these bills yet, I want to take a moment and look at the actual text of them. So starting with House Bill 322, it limits state agencies, school districts, school administrations that teach history, civics, politics, social studies, etc., from teaching these things. And specifically, it's limiting itself to 11 different concepts. But I wanted to point out subsection C, and I know this is getting a little in the weeds, but it states that if a student completes a course that indicates any of the concepts described in divisions A1 to A11 of the section, that course shall not count towards the requirement of high school graduation. So for students who already completed courses that touch on these things, then, well, too bad, so sad. You don't get those credits anymore. And so similarly, this isn't the same bill, just modifies a different section. It says no teacher should be required by a policy or any state agency, et cetera, to affirm in a belief in the systemic nature of racism or like ideas, or in the multiplicity or fluidity of gender identities or like ideas against the teacher's sincerely held religious or philosophical convictions. So that's currently what's being debated in your legislature. So what were those 11 things I went over? Here's a list of them. Read them at your pleasure, but I want to focus on the second one, an individual by virtue of the individual's race or sex. This is a banned topic that can no longer be discussed or taught in schools, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. So not only does that ban critical race theory, that kind of cuts at the heart of people talking about the concept of systemic racism, systemic anything, because not only does it prevent folk from discussing how they may be inheriting certain privileges or what have you, but to even talk about the kind of generational nature of oppression could even be banned over this, because the term oppression is put on equal footing with the terms racist or sexist.
Mhm.
So, that's kind of a broad catch all thing. And I mean,
Misogyny is included in that as
yeah.
well. Yeah.
And so, necessarily there's some things obviously we don't have a problem with. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Sure, we don't want teachers saying that to students. That would be bad. But that's not really what this bill is going after. It's not going after a whole bunch of rebel school teachers just saying certain subcategories of humans are better than other ones. It's going after uh, teachers who are teaching kind of structural things and how things can be inherited and things like that. Um, Again, subpoint 6, I think gets to that pretty well. An individual, by virtue of that individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Number 7, even more so. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or other form of psychological distress on account of individuals' race or sex. And no one's saying that we should shame a bunch of school children for their immutable characteristics. I don't think anyone, even the most radical critical race theorist, says we should just make people feel bad. But in the course of learning about things, discomfort's kind of a part of it. It's how we learn and grow and kind of confront our history. To then ban that bans the really confrontational nature of dealing with the history of the United States. And I know I told everyone to read this at their own speed, but number 10, the advent of slavery in the territory that is now the United States constituted the true founding of the United States. So again, that would be a topic of discussion banned in Ohio public schools.
Mhm.
Now let's go to House Bill 327 because it spans divisive concepts. And what would a divisive concept be? I can imagine a lot of them. Let's see what the Ohio legislature says on some. That one nationality, color, ethnicity, race, or sex is inherently superior. Okay, I mean that's certainly divisive, but not something I think will get up in arms. But point B, the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist. Now, depending on how one reads that, it doesn't give like a end date there. And I know many of us believe that we're not quite over that bridge yet. But to say the United States wasn't racist or sexist when it didn't let black folk or people of color more broadly or women vote or what have you, that seems pretty fundamental to me, especially looking at the Constitution at certain points in our past, right? And I've highlighted again that this again is banning divisive concepts that teach whether or not some of these things are conscious or unconsciously racist or oppressive or sexist. So these have the same co-sponsors and authors. So you'll see a lot of the same language, but they're all both really broad, but have a few different unique things about them. And since these were only released 2 days ago, I'm sure as I and other people delve more into them, we'll see more things that are objectionable. Um, so
It's the
again,
war on social studies teachers, quite frankly.
mhm.
Mhm.
And so other things that are bad. So not only are social study teachers banned and teachers more generally banned from teaching these subjects because maybe a math teacher wants to use, some sort of redlining topics to discuss mathematic principles or statistics. You can imagine these sorts of things. No school district shall accept private funding for the purpose of developing a curriculum, purchasing or selecting course materials, or providing teachers training or professional development for a course promoting derisive topics. So again, this is limiting what schools can accept in terms of funding, not simply what teachers can teach in the classroom. Now, to their credit, they have some caveats to this. Nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit discussion or using supplemental instructional materials as part of a larger course of academic instruction to teach disruptive concepts in an objective manner. Well, what the heck does that objective manner mean if we're not going to really go into certain things? I think the people who are pushing these laws have biases that they view as objective. Again, the impartial discussion of controversial aspects of teaching, of history shall not be impacted by that. The impartial discussion of controversial aspects of history, that sounds like an oxymoron to me. I share Mary's to that, right? Like, if it's controversial, people feel differently. Let's be impartial about that somehow. So bail reform, switching gears here. So the Senate and House bills are very similar. These are bipartisan. This is to go from a very, in my view, negative to in my view, positive things. There's a lot of changes happening to bail reform. And I've listed a few, and I'm going to go over a few more than what is in this slide. Essentially gives the courts a lot more flexibility where it counts, where I think people who want to see reform in the criminal justice system want to see some more avenues for just to enact mercy or community protections. I think some of these things are positive. So, the court has to have people's income in mind when they're setting their bail. That's always been true, but it's good to have this kind of rewritten down in law. I think it'll make courts view the poverty affidavits that folks sign in order to get assigned counsel a lot closer, because oftentimes courts just look and see, are they below the threshold to have to pay for their own attorney? Yes, no. But I think this will be more in line of saying, hey, is this person that just put down all zeros because they've been homeless for 4 years? Should we really just say, all right, you can get your attorney, you're out of here. By the way, $10,000 bail, enjoy, right? Um, I think that will, not to say that that was a characterization, obviously, but I think it's encouraging various things. It's also taking mental health concerns into consideration. Let me bring up something else real quick. Okay. It allows for, let me scroll down to the actual bill here. And again, counsel even the individual can make ability to pay inquiries, and there are certain time frames that judges will have to then set a hearing for if that type of request was warranted. Um, so, for instance, courts can now, if the court can order mental health evaluations in cases involving menacing by stalking or similar laws like that, or they can look at when folks violate a protection order. So folks can get a protection order if they're feeling victimized. This will allow them to look at how that should affect bail. But beyond that, that's kind of more of an exception now than, let's look at all these community concerns before we really address whether or not this person will be able to return to court because of this. For instance, courts may now only forfeit a monetary bond because of an accused failure to appear. And it repeals a whole bunch of existing laws about the form of bail, detention meaning incarceration, when folks can't post their bail or it isn't offered, right? It also repeals a whole bunch of things regarding forfeiting one's bail for things beyond not appearing to court, right? So there might still be loopholes here. There's no laws perfect, right? I could envision someone getting accused of a second crime and then they get in jail in a different county, then miss their court hearing in the first county, and then their bail is forfeited then, right? But limiting it to the express purpose of court appearance, which is really what it's supposed to be for, overall a positive thing. Joan, I can kick it back over to you and stop sharing my screen if you want to talk a bit about some things relating to the environment, if that's what you wanted to turn to.
Okay. Well, I was going to see if anybody had any questions
Oh,
first
yes.
about the education or the bail reform. By the way, the House bill on bail reform is being sponsored by one of our favorite friends, and that's David Leland. Those of you who attended our spring gathering know that David was on our panel along with Nikki Antonio and Representative Denson. Um, so any questions?
Education ones that you talked about, do you have a guess when there will be opportunity for opposition testimony, and also how that's going to be treated by the press? I had already read a little bit about it, and uh, and and it's like so many of these legislations. It's we're seeing it in all of the Republican legislatures, it seems. Is this
Right.
coming from the Heritage Foundation, or do you know where that this is coming from?
Yeah, part of it is coming from the research arm of the Heritage Foundation. What is it that's called? It's Heritage. Uh, it's the Heritage Foundation,
Okay.
but it has like Heritage Institute, I think is the name that they use.
Okay.
And yeah, the language is being repeated across a lot of different states. And of course, some of the language is being drawn from the executive orders of President Trump when he banned the teachings and workshops on critical race theory.
Okay. And
And
that
just to,
is it 1619 project, or what was that? That's some of this
Yeah.
too, right? Okay.
and I wanted to, I'm not sure when exactly oppositional testimony will start being permitted, because these were introduced 2 days ago, so y'all
Yeah.
are on the cutting edge right now. So hooray, we're doing our job here at UUJO, keeping y'all up to date. But I think there's a lot to kind of see how this will play out. Right now, it's all Republican sponsored and co-sponsored, and who knows what type of traction they'll gain, or whether this is just kind of a virtue signaling, there we go,
Yeah.
type of action, saying, look, we're introducing these bills, we're the most conservative of conservative, vote for us conservative folk. And I think it's important to just kind of put a caveat, generally just saying, like, when the media looks at these types of bills, you know different folks are consuming different types of media, so they might hear completely different things than some of our other neighbors about these sorts of bills. Like, oh, these bills are, righting all these wrongs and stopping these darn teachers from bad mouthing the United States and making our children feel ashamed of who they are. You can definitely paint these things in different lights, and
Right.
Right.
I think that's gonna play a role in public opinion on these sorts of things.
I have several articles that have come out in different newspapers around the state, highlighted on the UUJO Facebook page. So we can read, what's happening with that. But as Tad said, these education bills were just recently introduced, and they haven't even had their sponsor hearing yet, let alone a proponent hearing. And then the third would be for an opponent hearing. So that really is, at least 3 weeks. But I don't know I have not heard yet whether these are being fast tracked or not. They're definitely a form of political theater, because the list of co-sponsors, such as the one on divisive concepts, is huge. I mean, it looks like they've got half or 3/4 of the Republicans in the House signed on to it. It's just a huge, huge list of sponsors. Um, and that tells me that there's theater here, but I'm not sure that it's something that they really want to fight and die on. That may not be a hill they want to fight and die on if there's opposition. If nobody opposes, then of course they're going to pass it.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? I'll just put into the chat a little link that is from our friends at Common Cause, and it's actually a tool to help you write a letter to the editor with suggestions about the voting restrictions bill, the House Bill 294, but you can use it for any bill, any bill. So you could use the same tool because it immediately links you to the newspapers in your area. And you can use that if you want to write a letter to the editor about the education bills, or if you want to write one about the anti-protest bills. And Common Cause doesn't mind at all. They said, go ahead and use it. Just know that the talking points they have listed are the ones about the voter restriction bill. Okay, so feel free to use that. And that will help you in terms of, length and how to submit, and then giving you the local newspapers that you can submit to all automatically right there in front of you.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a really good tool. Any other questions on that? Anybody have anything to contribute? Because some of you hang around other people at the State House and may know other things going on around the education bills or the bail reform bills.
I did see that in education, that there just was a bipartisan bill that was about requiring the teaching of adding for kindergarten through sixth grade, required teaching about child sexual abuse prevention, where they did have like from seventh grade through 12th grade, it already has required sexual violence prevention, like date rape type things. It just made me feel good to see that there was something bipartisan. I didn't think there was anything anymore. So that was kind of encouraging.
Good. Well, actually, the bail reform has some bipartisan support. The one that's being proposed in the House by David Leland. So that's a good sign. It's a very good sign. Other questions?
Doesn't the abolition of the death penalty also have bipartisan support?
Ted?
Yes, I believe it does.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually going to link House Bill 1 in the chat as well, since we're talking a bit about school. That's kind of one of everyone, by everyone, I think I truly mean everyone here, wants to kind of take a look at school funding in Ohio, which is ruled unconstitutional by our state Supreme Court. And when they label something House Bill 1, that usually means they at least want to show folk that this is going to be a priority at the legislature. And since we're talking so much about schools, I thought it apt to at least link that language in the chat. It's all about taxes and how schools get funded, things like that. So it's a bit drier than some of these more bombastic things we're looking at, but it's important to keep on the radar.
And Howard, do you know anything else about the House attempts at, or the bills to eliminate the death penalty?
Yes, our own UU, Nikki Antonio, has introduced a bipartisan measure in the Senate.
Yeah.
And the conservative Republican Gene Schmidt from Southwest Ohio is a co-sponsor of the legislation. There are Republican lobbyists who are very much in the forefront of the move to abolish capital punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So I am more hopeful than I have been ever since moving to Ohio that we may actually see this. As I understand it, the immediate stumbling block is getting the leadership to schedule the hearings in committee,
Mm-hmm.
so that it can move forward.
Yeah.
But I think the votes are likely to be there if it can get put on the agenda. There was a briefing session this week by the Black Caucus, but those are, of course, the usual suspects. But what's really surprising is how many Republicans are now signing on.
Excellent.
Libertarians like Tom Brinkman in the Republican Party and others.
Now that one is on our list of bills to be watching into the future. And Nikki Antonio did make mention of it at our spring gathering when we were talking about future legislation that would support democracy. So great, thank you. Any other comments on those? Okay.
Is Tad's PowerPoint available? Going to be available somewhere?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I'll send
I
it to
can-
Joan and it'll get uploaded. So,
and I'll send out a copy and attempt to upload it to the website, or at least put a link on there. Okay. And last time I tried to upload a PowerPoint, it didn't work, so I put a link on our website, which I'll show you in just. I'll put the website address in here for you. Okay, couple other things. House Bill 99. Maybe you've heard of this one. This is to reduce the amount of training that teachers need in order to carry their guns into the classroom. They had been required under our current law to do the same kind of training that it would be required of a first responder or peace officer. But that was too onerous. So it is now proposed that teachers have 8 hours of training before they are allowed to carry handguns into the classroom. Now, of course, you know, the teachers union opposes this. Mothers Demand Action opposed this. They had opposition testimony last week, and over 101 folk gave opposition testimony, much of it in person. So it was not voted out of committee in the House. The exact nature of its future is in doubt. So right now there's a lot of opposition against House Bill 99 that would enable teachers to just take 8 hours of training, simple training, and then carry a handgun loaded into the classroom. And that one's before the Criminal Justice Committee. Okay. Yesterday was a fascinating day because we are part of a coalition, the Stop the Brine Spreading Coalition. And there is a law in the House, or a proposal in the House and a proposal in the Senate right now to allow the bottling and the selling of brine from oil and gas wells in Walmart and in Lowe's and Home Depot as a de-icer. The problem is that this de-icer is extremely high in radium 226 and radium 228. And those in themselves are, you know, carcinogens, horrible ones that cause bone cancer and liver cancer, et cetera. And these are also the components that devolve into radon gas that causes lung cancer. And they want to be able to sell this brine on the open market, you know, as a commodity. And you know, there's only one company in Ohio that produces it, and they produce it with a secret formula from the waste that they get from their oil and gas wells. Well, this is the battle of the scientists, because of course the oil and gas folk bring in their scientist paid. And on the other hand, there's a ton of scientists from the Sierra Club and the Buckeye Environmental Network and many, many others who are saying this science is wrong. You are leaving out key elements such as the harmful nature of the radium 226, 228, as well as the levels of radium 226 and 228 that are over 330 times higher than allowed in any kind of discharge in the state of Ohio. I mean, it's kind of a mess. And so we were there testifying yesterday. We were supposed to testify today, this morning, but at the very last moment yesterday morning, they decided to move the hearing to Wednesday afternoon. So we scrambled. We did get at least 6 of us down there to testify. But once again, they were very surprised at the amount of opposition that came in. They had not expected anybody to oppose this new marketing of Aqua Salina radioactive de-icer. Okay. So we are watching this one. We did do a lot of opposition testimony. A lot of people had to send theirs in written because they couldn't take off work and they couldn't rearrange their schedule to be there at the hearing yesterday afternoon. But I want to let you know that we are on that one, both on the House bill and the Senate bill, which is just a mirror of it. But they thought they could just kind of slide in this law that would enable this one company to sell radioactive de-icer on our store shelves with no warning and no labels on it, by the way. So if you hear of that one, and that will be going out on the, if there's more opposition testimony or more opposition hearings in the Senate, you'll be hearing about that one on the UUJO network too. Any questions on that?
Could we say, yeah, we'll approve this if you do an amendment that says that the CEO of the company offers his home as a testing site for 3 years to prove the safety of this product?
Right. No, that's a good one. As opposed to having radioactive snow angels made by our children who are playing in the snow near a driveway or a sidewalk that was used with this de-icer. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we are, our coalition is working very heavily on that one. Other questions, other bills that, these are the ones we're watching. These are the ones we're working with right now. Other concerns?
If I can I'm just going to add the link to House Bill 300 as well. That's the one that bans natural gas extraction from Lake Erie.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Again, that's all Democrat supported. I don't expect it to potentially be a very popular bill. If we're going to call some virtual cigarettes, maybe it's fair to do it the same to perhaps ones that are more in line with our UU values as well. But I think since we had mentioned it, that's also in the chat. Along with 282, which was the Brian one that Joan had just spent her time giving a good overview of.
And Linda just asked about the Odnr reports on the radioactivity. And we have an entire education packet that we sent to every one of the representatives on the House Energy Committee. So I'll send that to you, Linda. And if anybody else wants it, put your name in the chat and I'll make sure that you get that, because we needed to do a very careful education of the committee members, because they're not scientists. I'm not a scientist, but we had scientists who we were listening to who are writing this stuff up very, very carefully. Okay. All righty. It's been a busy time at the State House. We think that they're all going to go on vacation, on break, after they get through the budget, and then maybe pass a few of these bills, or try to very quickly when we're not looking, and then take a break. On the other hand, we've also heard that they don't plan on taking much of a break, and that they will work through June and into, and coming back in July, and then take a break in August and come back, because they have a lot of work to do. And they have a lot of, voter restrictions to pass and things like that. So we don't know when we're watching it.
Speaking of legislative timelines, is there any updates on redistricting and how all that's going, and the census stuff for all that, since that's all due at the end of September, right?
Yeah. And yes, there is a concerted push by the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, which we're part of too, to tell the governor, start the commission now, even though you do not have the data, because there's a lot of housekeeping that has to happen. And they could have all that ready to go when they finally get the data at the end of September, and then, move into it. But for some reason, the governor is dragging his feet and not starting that commission yet, and says that they'll start it when they get the data. So that is a very large effort right now to call the governor and say, start the commission work now, the organizing work now. It's going to be a real tight fit. I mean, it's going to be at the last minute, it may be problematic. One of the House members I was talking with the other day thought that they'd have to revert to the 4-year plan. It's kind of a fallback in our current legislation, that if they can't get agreement on a 10-year plan, that they fall back to a 4-year one. And pardon me, but she thought we'd have to fall back to the 4-year one. We don't know. But that's the last I heard. Okay. Okay, other questions? I mean, we've got tons of questions. Life is like that right now. Okay. If you would like, oh yeah, okay. Pat Hoffman wants a packet. I'll send that to you, Pat. Make sure I got that. Okay. Would you like to see just a snippet of the sponsor testimony for House Bill 294 around the voting restrictions? Or have some of you seen that one already? Okay, well, let me just show you just a snippet to let you see what is happening with this one when it was being proposed by the sponsors. Okay. There we go.
They,
can you hear
not
that?
I, or I mean, said that the 10-day deadline for mail ballot requests maxed voter suppression. In 2020, more than, as I pointed out, 450,000 Ohioans requested mail ballots in that final week, with 91% of those voters returning a completed ballot. And I'll give you, if there is a more reasonable timeline, but what that is proposed in your bill compared to other states puts us at the 45th most restrictive in the United States. So what, I guess, I mean, you alluded to it, but that 10-day window, I think, is too restrictive in terms for people who want to still use that option. And when the 3-day window now, you have a 91% of people being able to return their ballot.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweeney, you've just admitted that 9% of the people were disenfranchised by the 3-day requirement. That's a big number. If we disenfranchise 9% of the Ohio population, I guarantee you there'd be plenty of people jumping up and down and screaming about it. So that's number one. Number two, I'm sure if you looked at statistics, you would find that the biggest days for people to return their income tax forms would be along about April 14th in a typical year. This year was late. All we're doing is incentivize people to not procrastinate. Of course, it's clear that the closer you get to a deadline, the more people decide to act on the deadline. But we have an interest in getting as many votes in by election day as we can. And we're not changing the fact that if you mail it in and it's postmarked by the Monday before the election, we'll count it if it straggles in here 10 days later. So if we're giving people 10 days on the back end, we thought it was very fair to say we want 10 days on the front end to discourage procrastination, to lessen the risk of disenfranchisement by people who applied on the Saturday before the election when it was a physical impossibility for the Board of Elections to have received that in the mail and spin around the ballot through the mail back to that person to come in and get their vote in by Monday. That's nonsense. So where did the 10 days come from? It came from the 10 days on the back end that we recognize it might take the post office 10 days to straggle those votes in if they were cast by Monday before the general election. 10 and 10. That's called symmetry. Classical architecture. Symmetry.
Okay, I just wanted to share pardon me.
Saturday Night Live could do a great parody of that.
So this isn't necessarily one of the provisions that we're super against, is it, or is it? In terms of this is the restriction on how having to request your ballot before
Yeah.
Like a 10, yeah, because we don't trust the mail.
But you can request a ballot online, and then they can mail it to you.
Mhm.
And even if it takes 10 days to get to you, you can still then fill it out and take it to a Dropbox.
Right.
But this is saying that those 10 days before the election, you cannot, even if you're doing it online, you can't get an absentee ballot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like if it wasn't that last 3 days or so, something like that, that would definitely be, it would be impossible for someone to receive the ballot.
Right.
And so there is a limit there where it makes sense, and the less we trust the mail, the larger that limit becomes.
Yeah, but as Representative Sweeney was saying,
Yeah.
thousands of voters were able to request an absentee ballot this last election, and they brought it back into the drop boxes well within the time, within that
Right.
the last few days. So, the fact that we would be cutting off 10 days to get a mail-in ballot because of the 10 days that it takes the post office on the other end, because it's symmetry. Okay. And he wants to incentivize people to get their ballot. Now, since when do you get punished for a decision to vote at whatever time? I mean, it's not a privilege that you get penalized for if you don't get it in on a particular time. You have to vote by election day, of course. But it was just the attitude about voters that I thought was so incredibly galling. Just to be, really up here about my editorializing, right?
Oh, speaking of galling, people saw the COVID cowards thing from sites.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
Right, because he doesn't believe that any drop boxes should be out there at all. And he said the only reason we had drop boxes this last election was because quote, COVID cowards refused to go in and vote in person. I am a COVID coward. I'm sorry, guys. That was pure entertainment, pure political theater. But I just thought I would share that one with you to make your day. Any other comments or questions? Okay. All right. Well, I think we have our hour is just about up. And if there's any other statements, anything else that people want, or anybody else that, oh yes, and Howard has put the abolition bills into the chat for us. Thank you. Okay, so you can get a hold of those as well. So any other comments or questions before we close? Okay, well,
Can I ask one? I just thought of one.
Sure, go right ahead.
I just recently read that, and I think it was something that Heather Cox Richardson wrote, that as of right now, only 24% of Americans identify as Republican.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that a big drop? I'm just wondering if you get any sense overall. I just can't imagine that rational people who aren't hooked on Fox News aren't, even if they're conservative, aren't appalled by these things that are happening. And so I'm wondering, I mean, I know we're far from being, a purple state like we used to be.
Right.
I know that, but I just find myself wondering what is the popularity of these, what's going to happen to the popularity of the Republicans here in Ohio and perhaps in the country? Do you get any data on that or anything?
Just one quick reaction is I would say that those numbers are going down from both ends. Like it's being burned at both ends, right? Folk who don't like what the Republicans are doing are leaving, and folks that like the, more Trump-esque aspects of Republicans, but Trump will badmouth a Republican like that, right?
Yes.
So those people no longer view themselves as folks, if they ever did, right? A lot of these were people who weren't typically often voting, but they don't view themselves as Republicans either. So
Right.
I would say a bit of both that goes into the lack of, people identifying as Republicans. Another thing I would say is just because a party's views are changing and their policies are changing doesn't mean people are going to stop identifying. I know there are tons of quote unquote real old school Democrats who are like real old school Democrats in the way of a Dixiecrat, right?
Mhm.
So
Okay.
party identification doesn't always tell politics.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And
I
go ahead,
just
Howard.
saw an article in the Cincinnati Enquirer about a program called America Talks, which is inviting volunteers to get in a one-on-one virtual conversation
Hmm.
with someone who has an opposing political perspective. So I signed up for it, and it's scheduled for Saturday, June 10th, these one-on-one meetings. And to qualify, I had to answer a dozen questions about my views on things like legalization of marijuana. And so that will help them pair up people who have radically different points of view in order to promote a civil conversation between them. If I can find it quickly before this meeting ends, I could put in a link to that information.
Okay.
It's all right. Yeah, there's a web link here.
Good.
It's quite in keeping with the message that Reverend Connie Simon gave at the UUJO meeting last November. What do we do now was her theme. And she spoke about how more than 70 million people voted for Trump and encouraged us not to just dismiss those people,
Hmm.
but to try and understand them
Hmm.
and to engage in conversation with them.
Hmm. And there's another organization that has a very strong presence in Cincinnati and a stronger growing one now in Columbus and Cleveland called Braver Angels. And I've put their link in the chat. And Braver Angels does training so you recognize your own biases. And then they structure one-on-ones with others of, opposing viewpoints or worldview. And they also do debates on different topics that bring red and blue together, conservative and liberal together, and debate in a structured way online on frequent basis on different divisive concepts. So Braver Angels is one that has a long presence or a large presence now in Ohio. And I think it was actually started in Cincinnati, and they do an excellent free training online on how you can talk with your own friends and family. Yeah, when things are discomforted. Yeah, when they don't agree with you. So I'd say that they're a great one to look up too, as well as Howard's America Talks.
I put in the wrong URL, so I'm just sending a second one.
Okay, good.
It's called A Weekend of Connection in the Midst of Deep Division.
Yep.
Step to Heal America.
Yep.
So
I'm very heartened by seeing Braver Angels and then this one on America Talks. The more of that we have going, the better off we're all going to be.
In response to Kathy's question, I would also add that I'm aware of a research project that is looking at the entire Midwest region that is trying to really sort out, how things happened the way they happened. How did people who voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 then turn around and vote for Trump? There is some extensive research being conducted around that very issue, also factoring in a race class narrative lens. So I'd be happy once that the Need More Fund, where I worked, helped to support that research to some degree.
Good.
So when that is available, I'll be happy to pass that along to Joan to disseminate to the group. We expect to have some preliminary work done hopefully by the end of the summer. So it's going to be really taking a deep dive about what's it all about? How can people really not understand their own self-interests?
It's true.
Yeah, so.
And what I learned in seminary in my pastoral care classes is that when people are faced with change they wanted, change they didn't want, change they created, change they didn't create, that was just laid on them. But anytime people or groups face some kind of change, they react with a form of anxiety. Now, many of us are able to work through that quickly and say, okay, this is a change, we'll deal with it. Others are hardwired almost and cannot deal with that change. They can't deal with it without a great deal of help, or it takes them a great deal of time. And when people are anxious, they lash out. They do things that make no sense at all. They try to withdraw and keep things the way they are by hook or by crook. And I find that that also explains a lot of the voting pattern we see with some folk, because there's a lot of demographic change and technological change and economic change. I mean, the demographics alone of the changing browning of America, they call it, you know, the blacking and the browning of America are things that are driving some folk to this withdrawal and anxious response that they don't even realize, but it's true. I mean, but it's real. It's a real thing there.
I wanted to make a point about Bill Seitz. Joan, you showed that clip of Bill Seitz saying ridiculous, outrageous things. But we have to appreciate that he was also in the forefront of the reform on the criminal justice incarceration process and trying to reduce jail time. And in some ways, the Democrats wanted to be tough on crime, and it was Republican leadership that made some of the reforms possible. So we have allies at some point, and the same individuals are adversaries at other points.
It's one of the oldest adages in community organizing: no permanent enemies, no permanent allies.
Absolutely not. All right. Now and that's a good lesson to know.
Sorry, this is Lou. I would like to interrupt the program to ask a question.
Yes, Lou.
Among all of you, I can see and guess all of you are so-called white. And Joan can tell you I'm neither white nor black. So I'm asking this question. If these people insist to see everything with a color lens, is that good to have a strategy to maybe just to, I wouldn't say threaten them, but just to ask them, how about let's separate? The people only want to stay in the same color, not to be brown or black or whatever as one state, the other people form another state. Remember, Virginia and West Virginia, they split. And Texas, we still hear today that lots of people still think that Texas should be an independent country. California has been talked about separating either in 2 parts or 3 parts. So maybe there is one chance Ohio actually can be the champion to go ahead of any of them to actually get this done.
Economically, structurally, I understand where you're coming from, dear, but that's not, I don't think, a feasible option for us.
No, I'm just saying as a talking point.
As a talking
to
point.
Let them understand if they want to stay all not browned, not blackened.
Yes.
First of all, they will lose lots of good food to begin with.
Well, that's true.
right?
So
That's true.
Cleveland.com
We
actually
all love
envisions,
brownies, right? Some people do like the blondies. Just give you an
Right.
example. And the black and the catfish, lots of people love that too. So should we make a suggestion? Just make a suggestion politely to them. Say, how about some people think about this? Maybe this will suit your interest better.
But we got to remember that the anxiety people feel around change is not something that they're really that conscious about. They don't consciously say, I'm going to be anxious because I see changing demographics. They just feel it in an unease. And then that raises the anxiety. So they would say, oh, no, we do not want to be prejudiced. And I don't have a prejudice bone in my body. But it's very individual, not systemic. They see prejudice as a individual response or moral failing as opposed to a systemic problem. But most of the time they just know that they're anxious, they know that there's fear, but they're not quite sure why. Tad, you're going to say something too.
Oh, I was going to say that, this is not really even the meat of the point I think Lou was making, but
Yeah.
Cleveland.com did have an interesting series of articles about cutting up the state of Ohio into like 6 different states. And I've linked separating the Western Reserve out from the rest of Ohio. And maybe this is just my Northeast Ohio bias showing, but for years Northeast Ohio was colonized by folks from Connecticut when they did the whole, we're going to take Connecticut all the way to the Pacific, right?
Yeah.
So let's imagine what that state might look like as a piece of Cleveland.com did, which again, completely separate, I think, from news, like actual point. But
Yeah.
for folks interested in seeing if we have things like that in Ohio, take a look at those pieces. Also, I have family over for Memorial Day weekend for the first time since the pandemic, so I have to go a bit early. Apologies.
That's quite all right, because our time is about up. And I was only going to say, hey, look at the counties in Portland, Oregon that want to join Idaho. Anyway, if there's any other comments. No, this is good. Any other comments before I close, my friends? Yeah,
Thank
Chris.
you very much.
No. Okay. Then let me close then with a little statement from Margaret Wheatley. She said that the cure for despair is not hope. Now, if we're despairing at all these various things happening with the legislature, just remember the cure for that is not hope. She said it is discovering what we want to do about something we truly care about. So may you have a wonderful weekend of discovery and rest. And Kathy has a beautiful puppy there for us to see, which is glorious. And happy holiday. Thank you.